Hi everyone, this is Sinead, and we're here in the live hangout with Yogan.
Hi.
And tonight we will be discussing his experience in relation to possession, where he specifically experienced a mind possession related to video games, and how the interviews on Equaf he had listened to, actually interestingly enough, there were two different interviews. What was the two interviews you listened to, Yogan, that
Yeah.
had a impact on your process?
So spiraling into possession, and the reptilian series, and losing your purpose.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, this is already an interesting point. You know, we got two different interviews you listened to, and how those two just clicked and supported you in the video game possession. So here we're going to firstly ask, Yogan to share what was your experience in relation to the video games possession, and how did you get into it, and how did it affect your life?
Yeah. Um, so I mean, I've been playing video games for a long time since childhood, and throughout the years I've been playing it. Going to school, I would play after school, maybe for like an hour. And so something I was a really part of my routine, something I did often, and it's continued into adult life, even though I thought maybe I might stop after I go to college, but kept playing in different ways. And in terms of it being possession, which I guess it's possible to play video games without being possessed, but here what made it possession for me uh, was me basically doing it within emotion, within when I would feel upset or stressed or just wanting to forget things for a while, I could play video games and just forget things. And I really had to deal with something if I didn't want to deal with it in a moment. And you could say you could say it was effective in the sense that I would play video game and I felt like I was sort of away from it. Though at the same time, like I would play for many hours sometimes, and I would play for so many hours that it wasn't enjoyable anymore, and I sort of felt that nagging feeling like, there's something that I'm not looking at, and it didn't feel good anymore. But then it's like this sort of like a cyclical pattern, you could say. Like it's similar to what people look at addictions when you go in through a cycle and you go through it, and I would play for many hours, and it would reach a point where, then I would be like so fed up with it, then I would stop and I would try to get away from it for a while, and then I would always come back at some point. Yeah.
All right. So just a question in relation to when you became emotional,
Mhm.
or something in your environment triggered a reaction, or it just got too much inside yourself.
Mhm.
The question I have is, like, how would you, for example, start playing your games? Like, would you like pull out your chair and sit down and just start playing?
Mhm.
Would there be a definitive behavioral way in which you would approach the playing of the games?
Okay. um, yeah. So within that, in detail, um, like one way at least I would approach is I would sort of look at the things that were sort of bothering me, and then I would like thoughts or pictures or memories of games I've played will sort of come up, and I would be like, yeah, I would start getting this excited kind of feeling coming up, and then I would sort of then go and approach video games within that point of excitement, enjoyment, and just uh, I guess maybe thrill, and then just sort of start playing, sitting down, and just all in one motion, like one sweep. So it was like then I would go to my room immediately and just go, and then I would sit, and then I would turn on the game, and then I'll play. So there wasn't like really time involved where I would like sort of think about or decide what to play, or it was just sort of I just felt like I wanted to play that, and just I would just go for it. And yeah.
So, would you also, in having a look at approaching video games with emotion or with excitement? Uh, the excitement, energy. I mean, I've personally also worked with a couple of people who approach video games as more of just an enjoyment. And interestingly enough, they do have more of a balance within their lives when it comes to video games. But here we mainly also want to focus on the emotional aspect of where you know that you've deliberately gone and sat down to play the game just to get away from something or get away from someone. Would you say that over time, like let's say for example, there was a person who really triggered your emotions very well, you know, in your immediate living environment, and just to either not explode in it or, you know, speak it out or act it out, you would kind of just keep it inside and kind of maneuver yourself to your video games.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that your relationship with that person, you know, got more and more intense, like some way or another? Because I mean, the context that I'm looking at here is if you keep on suppressing your emotions, if you keep on suppressing the things that are coming up inside of you by, for example, just walking away, going playing video games, getting over it, you know, where it seems like you get over it or you just feel better. But what does happen with suppression is that the emotion compounds and builds in the mind and then can come out where you actually start having more arguments with that very person.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. Have you faced anything similar to this in your life?
Yeah, so that's another way of approach video games. Um, so yeah, so let's say with my mom, for example, I would sometimes we would I would let's say she would ask me to do some chores and I didn't want to do it, or I felt like my time was restricted, so I already had a resistance to doing that. So maybe I would go and do it. I would do it really quickly, and within that, not sort of facing that I didn't had like a resistance to it, and I did my chores within resistance, and then I would go play video games within trying to get away from that resistance that I've had towards doing the chores. Um, so yeah, that's one way.
Okay. So, I mean, this is a dimension that everyone can have a look at because the specific context of possession that we're discussing here when it comes to video games is where like with what Yogan is facing or has faced in relation to deliberately knowing to a certain extent that you're sitting in front of the video game to get away from something inside yourself. You know, I mean, so many people think it's normal, you know, where you just get irritated or agitated, and I mean, rather than speaking or acting it out, you sit in front of the video games. And I mean, look, from a certain perspective, I suppose you could say that it was supportive because, I mean, other people do go into explosive arguments, you know, and you say things and you do things that you would regret. So from a certain perspective, the video games, Yogan, if you also have a look, would you agree that when you were a child, for example, you didn't know how to handle your emotions or actions and your experiences toward people? So from a certain perspective, would you say that the video games in that context supported you?
Yeah, I mean, now that you're saying that, it's kind of funny. I'm seeing there could be a possible connection, I guess, within how a lot of people view me as like, even though some like I feel sometimes nervous around other people, I notice people they've told me like, "Oh, you seem so calm, you seem so relaxed," and so I guess growing up, I've been seen that as that kind of person that doesn't get very emotional very often, or like angry or upset. And I remember my parents telling me this when my brother and sister were like fighting in the car, and they're like, "Oh, you're so patient." So I don't know, like at least in that context, yeah, I would play video games often, and I wouldn't, get upset or create a lot of arguments or conflicts. That could be that's like a good or bad thing. There's like two sides of it, of course, because then at times I wouldn't express myself really. looked at or tried to find different solutions. And then video game was my only, or one of my only approaches, I guess.
Yeah,
Towards
I mean, this is an interesting dimension that we're opening up here now because, okay, if you have a look, for example, at the video games where you used it to suppress the things that you didn't know how to handle or how to deal with. But at the same time, that would, to a certain extent, develop like a suppression mechanism inside yourself where it would just be easy to kind of keep everything inside, which would, on the outside, make you seem like, no, I'm calm and normal and stable
yeah,
and just chilled and okay, but actually on the inside, like this is happening.
yeah,
And the video games, because your mind is now busy with the video games, your mind is more like quiet, so it's not thinking of anything or anyone out there. So to a certain extent, you don't feel or experience anything that's real. All that you will experience is the emotional feelings that you connected to the video game in itself.
mm-hmm.
And the consequence, though, that I've also observed in people who I've worked with is where, okay, if you suppress your emotions through video games, what also becomes difficult is, as you've mentioned, your expression. How to really express yourself in moments when you're happy or when you're excited or when you want to approach someone or get to know someone or, things like that. So would you say that as a person, you've also kind of been isolated or felt isolated, like you don't know
Yeah,
how to
exactly.
approach people, things like that?
Mm-hmm. That's it exactly. Yeah, that's basically that's how I've been basically my whole entire life growing up. Yeah, always like not having very many friends, and the friends I did have were very. I didn't interact very much, express very much with. It was more me being there and just not really saying much. Um, yeah,
Okay, so there wasn't much interaction or communication, like
yeah, it was
actual
very,
development of a connection with yourself, of a connection with others, and within that connection, opening up. I mean, if you have a look at connections with people and with friends and things like that, I mean, that's essentially how you develop yourself, how you grow, how you learn. And I mean, if you don't have that and like open up yourself to a certain extent, then a lot of things become quite difficult because I mean, if you have a look at you suppressing your emotions
mm-hmm.
with the video games, that's the one thing that you got good at. You got good at. So I mean, suppressing emotions is one thing that defined you, if you will, throughout your
Yeah.
life.
I mean, I can see like larger patterns in how like my general like for example, I was very studious. Like I would focus on school, and that didn't require much social interaction. So I would just do that, and I would notice that sort of not being emotional during test taking and studying allowed me to do better in school and for tests and homework. Um,
Okay. Right, but I mean, obviously, what we have to look at here is that suppressing your emotions through video games,
yeah.
even though yes, it did support you in some ways, we still do need to have a look at the um, that very starting point because, all right,
Yeah.
it may have helped you in some areas, but also produced major consequences in others. Major
'Cause, yeah.
consequences in the sense that you had difficulty establishing relationships with people,
Yeah,
um, things
'cause,
like
like,
that.
yeah, because I felt like that my whole entire life. Meaning, that I felt my emotions, even though I was sort of expressing them. I knew they were there, and they're just there. It was just like it was normal for me to feel maybe sad or upset or stressed, and then it was suppressed for a while. Then it would just come up again. So that was like my normal experience. So I definitely didn't enjoy that. I didn't like it, and I knew that there was something off or something wrong with, not being able to express, or that whole not being very sociable, because then a lot of people point that out, how I was quiet or not very sociable or wouldn't be very outgoing. And so sort of seeing that there was something wrong, I just didn't, really understand, I guess, what's going on there. So
Okay,
yeah,
cool. Yeah, that's an interesting point that you knew, you felt there was something, and
yeah,
but you again didn't know maybe even how to word it or how to look for it or how to resolve it. So you continued with what you knew, which
yeah.
was video games. All right, so let's have a look then, Yogan, at maybe sharing what supported that moment in yourself or your life to go, okay, this has to change. My emotional relationship to video games is not supporting me, it's not supporting me, and I need to change this. Like, what significantly happened to make that change?
Um, well, I mean, I remember, like, looking back through my life, there were certain people that I, like, very, like, specific people that I saw that were really cool people, they were very friendly, they were very different, very much more understanding than other people, that I would like to be friends with them or get close to them. But, because of how I was, I never really did anything, I guess. It was just sort of, then the relationship sort of just faded away over the years. And that sort of, seeing that, like, well, I want people to have that, but I see that I'm not able to have that, and I see that playing video games and doing that as, what I do is, like, even on the very fact that I do that for many hours, or if any person do that for many hours, that means that, those are hours you could have spent on doing other things. So it's like I see that also when in moments when I could have done something more social or social related, that I would rather play video games because it felt more comfortable as well. Um, so it's like I saw that, I could have, that there's something that needed to change, and even just kind of just like trying to find a way to get, I guess, to get what I want, but, sort of having let go of what I've always done. It's like
Yeah.
very,
So, I mean, that must have been challenging as well, because it's like you've essentially done this relationship with video games for years, and yet there's like this little thought coming up, or this point inside yourself coming up of, but there is something more. There is something that I have to do about this, but again, it's like not many people know how to, like what are the steps? Because it's like in your mind, you don't have any reference for, okay, how really to walk up to people. For most, it's like very normal, but many people don't understand that there's some people out there that just really inside themselves don't know how. They don't have um, the thought or the emotional or any reference of support inside their minds in how it is to really walk up to someone and talk to them. So my question to you, Yogan, is how exactly did you do that transfer process, practically speaking? Meaning, how did you minimize the hours of the video games and actually utilize those hours more effectively? Did it happen, for example, in a day, or was it a process?
yeah. Yeah, it was a process. It took, um, I mean, there was like a significant week where I was sort of applying something I've learned from the EQOF interviews, and of course, in addition, there were, you could say, months or years of, I guess, trying different things, or also just learning about how the mind works as well through DIP. So I guess within looking at the EQOF interviews, with the reptilian interviews, with what we mentioned before about spiraling to possessions and life without purpose, those kind of gave really a clear picture of, what happens if you're someone who doesn't have like any purpose in life, it doesn't like have something to strive for. And so within that, like that's how I related to when, I would play video games. Like I wasn't looking at the future, I wasn't looking at, what I can do. I would just focus on, what I just had, which was playing video games. And within that, like, then of course, then you just, that's all I would do. And then with looking at that point of, okay, then establishing something practical for myself, some goal that I can achieve, then I can actually, have something to remind myself, something to actually use. And then from that, like, I started structuring my day. And, of course, I spent time within, like, time sitting down with myself to set up my goals and set up something that I wanted to accomplish. And within this life, so like something to actually do. And within that, I would use that as a reminder throughout my day, through going to work, making money, through doing my daily things, to actually have some, let's say, purpose, some end goal that all of this would contribute towards.
Okay. It's also an interesting point because let's say, because if I have a look at it, when you were using video games or playing video games for many hours. I mean, look, there are many people who, for example, can relate to this, where I mean, you just have many extra hours within your day, and so you do play video games, and or where you use video games for just those emotional moments to just get away from the world. But at the same time, and Yogan, you can maybe share this as well, where you can see that if for example, this purpose point or this possession point, these two interviews that you listened to didn't quite come together for you, would you have just kind of stayed in the way that you are living or have been living? Because I mean, that's all that was there for you every single day, day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
Like just using the extra time you have to play video games, because I mean, what else is there to do in this life, type thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, like, I've had like short-term goals set for myself, but those short-term goals is like within not like having some like focal point, something that I see that I individually have to take, that I have to individually go after and like create for myself, where I'm the only one that can actually do that. Let's say like some career or some like developing some profession or some skill or some business, that within something that I have to do, within changing myself, something that I can attain. Um, that sort of like puts everything in perspective, because then it's all organized for that outcome. And I mean, I've had short-term goals, but having just short-term goals, it's like, then it becomes sort of diluted, because there's no focal point that I can see myself as like some vision for like what I'm gonna become or what I could become.
Yes, I mean, I can also relate to that, where someone once said to me as well, in terms of the point of purpose, is to have a purpose that almost to a certain extent is even more than you, is even greater than you.
Yeah.
Something greater, something more, because it's like to reach that goal, to really manifest that purpose, it's like you
Mhm.
have to almost work harder every
Yeah.
single day to
Yeah.
build or accumulate who you need to become and what you need to attain that goal or
Mhm.
manifest that purpose. So, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, Yogan, if I'm looking at like a visual illustration here
Mhm.
in what you went through, it's like your life in the beginning was like this box, and your mind and your life and everything within it was just in that box. But when the purpose point and the possession point like started opening up, it's like
Mhm.
that you got out of a box and you realized, whoa, I can actually do so much more with me and with my time, um, if I just sort out these emotions and invest more time of myself and my life to create me, to create what it is that I want.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is that, is that something you can relate to?
Yeah, I mean, just what I've been saying. Um, like what you said before, like that. Yeah, it's like for me, what I'm sort of putting out there for myself, it's like something. Yeah, like that's like a completely different person than who I am now, and so having that like you could say like a radical vision, something that's like a really like a real transformation, like and really to make like in detail like of how it would be or like what it would do or like the actual like let's say abilities like let's say being able to walk up to any person just talk to them or being able to have that social aspect for many reasons there's many reasons for that but that skill alone would be let's say it's a very tremendous thing if a person has that because then they're able to build connections for business or for
Yeah.
personal reasons or for many different purposes.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, definitely, because I mean, people in this world and your relationships or connections with them is the way that you build your life. You know? And maybe that's the question I have as well. Like, with your change that you've now applied, the less time playing video games and more time on yourself and your life, have you been making more connections with people, like putting yourself out there?
yeah, so it's interesting too because it's what I'm also working with my it goes a little bit hand in hand with my DIP. But so in terms of that, like at least with my dad, like I work with him now, pretty much like every day we're working more and more now starting this past week. And being with him, there's always been like some sort of conflict or resistance. And as I've been trying to uh, find ways to express myself to where I'm sort of changing like the subtle, like for example, we're like after work we were playing a chess game and he was doing, for the second game we were playing he was doing really well. He won the game, and normally I would sort of go into like I would be upset, then I would sort of may suppress it, but then I tried like a smiling sort of like you know sort of just like sort of expressing like well yeah you did like sort of expressing them that like yeah you did well and that's great and sort of like that like subtle change in how I move myself I guess to so that our relationship I guess becomes more better more productive because before we were always I mean I'm sure it can come up again but it's like there's a conflict where we're sort of like yelling at each other sort of arguing or sort of speaking with an emotion because of the stress that we push to one another and we push it back. So he's trying
Okay.
to spell that.
Yeah, because that's also another question that I wanted to ask, just to focus again on the main reason why you, for example, play video games, was to get away from the emotions. So have you been working more with the emotions in moments when they come up, like with your parents, for example, where instead of going to the video games, you introspect or, in the moment take responsibility, do some forgiveness or, do some writings, working on yourself. Um, how has that had an effect on your relationships with people, your interactions with them, and also your video games?
Um, yeah, I mean, just like last night with my mom, she came home from a trip and we were, she was sort of talking to me, saying hello, and the dishes weren't done, so I was already going to reaction with that, and because of the chore point, and so uh, I was able when we were talking in my room, I was able to sort of talk about the I guess reaction that I was sort of having and sort of bring that to I guess common sense uh, I guess solution where I was just telling her that or she was sort of bringing it up as well, sort of helping her in that but I would just like to do dishes for, for the family, not for the, but for like as part of being a part of the household. And so within, for her sort of, because she was entering into reaction as well, so I was able to not react, so wasn't able, so to keep her from reacting, which I would normally would do, we sort of just have each other react and bounce off one another to sort of end it in a common sense statement of, why we did the dishes, and so it wasn't a reaction anymore.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I mean, this is the main focus point as well within this all. Because this is a dimension I saw earlier in relation to video games. It can go one or two ways when it comes to suppression. One way is in relation to how you experienced it, Yogan, where you can suppress it, and yet it does also come out in moments of interaction with your parents or with other people, and it can get explosive. Or where there can be other people that suppress their emotions when it comes to video games, or not even suppress it, but actually bring it out more, where they can get emotional while playing the video game.
Mm-hmm.
And it can get intense, and it can get overwhelming and aggressive and things, and then they also take that and live it out in their outside world. So, as we said, I mean, the key within this all, and Yogan, as you've explained now as well, is to not use things in your reality as to get away from, to escape, or to suppress, because, I mean, that starting point and how you approach what you do is what takes things into possession. It's not the video game in itself. I mean, look, if video games had like these sonar impulses, that kind of went into your mind, taking you into brainwashing or possession, then I mean, yeah. But for most part, your relationship with video games is based on who you are. So, I mean, Yogan, like right now, how is your relationship with video games, where you've taken responsibility for your emotions that you're facing in your everyday life? When you do play video games now, like, how do you experience it?
Yeah, so I guess video games are sort of part of now, like, what I do, I guess, say for fun or just when I have some little extra time. And sometimes I decide not to play video games because I see something else that I would like to do. So it's no longer, oh, just play video games and that's it. It's like I have a choice of, okay, what do I actually want to do right now? How do I want to spend my time? And let's say if I do decide to play a video game, then I would play it. Then I would sort of, really, for example, like if it's like an online game where I'm competing with other people, like I actually try to do my best and actually try to like strategize and like have fun within that. Whereas before, I would be very sometimes emotional, just sort of not trying my best, not trying to really, or also like also other times like we're just playing a game that's not very serious and just just playing something that's really say more relaxing, just not very So it's like it's I guess sort of just to sort of pick and decide and what do I want to do with time that I have, so that doesn't overwhelm my schedule, which is what
Yeah,
it is.
yeah. I mean, as you're speaking, what I'm seeing is like video games is just a part of your life. It's now like you've got a choice actually
Yeah.
when you're looking at video games, because it's now not anymore like, oh, I'm emotional, or oh, I want to get an energy fix, and then you preoccupy your time with video games. It's now like, it's me and it's video games. Do I want to do it in this moment or not? So it's
Mm.
not anything in the background that's kind of driving you or pushing you to play video games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, is there anything else that you wanted to share for this evening, Yogan?
Well, the ECOF interviews. There are actually several of them. There are like about 7 of them. It's like sort of like a series where they all talk about purpose and they all talk about different dimensions of that. And there are a lot of interesting stories within that of how Well, it goes with Anu, so it's about Anu's story. So it's like very, it's very interesting. Gives very clear examples that you could sort of like That's what I took. I sort of took those stories to like apply it for me and sort of using that, I guess, as an inspiration or as a example. Um,
Okay, that's pretty cool. So would you say that the interviews were practical enough for you that you could listen to it and take from the information things that you could actually practice and apply in your life that made a difference?
yeah, I mean, it's also cool too that it was like a series, right? So it was like each interview followed with one another, and it's like this point of purpose was sort of expanded on over and over, and yeah, it just made it a practical point.
Okay, cool. All right. So, I mean, we've discussed quite a few dimensions. We'll leave a minute or so for any of our viewers who might have any questions for either me or you in relation to the topic that we're discussing. But for just to again quickly go over all the dimensions that we discussed. I mean, the main important point here is that for everyone to look at, as with Yogan, is that moment where you use video games from an emotional starting point and how it affects your personal life, your personal relationships, and not only that, but how much time do you invest in video games, and how much of that time could you actually rather be using to support yourself, create a life for yourself, be something more, and become something more. So that video games become a part of your life instead of you becoming part of video games, if you will. All right. So, Yogan, do you have any last support and assistance perspectives for all our viewers?
Um, so I know, like for me, like I didn't go into details, let's say, of naming the emotions, but I've like named the emotions for myself, which could include shame and guilt and stress and worry. Like there's so many different emotions involved. So it's very, for me, it assists me to name the emotions and feelings involved and being aware of that, and also really go into detail of that as much as you can. And
So identify your reactions in a moment when you're with someone, like name the game that your mind is playing and deal with it.
yeah. Um, Also, something else too within the purpose too was sort of in the moment when I was reminding myself my purpose. It was sort of something very clear where it felt very personal, meaning I spent time with myself to decide my purpose, so it was very clear on what that was. So when playing a video game or the emotions or thoughts came up about playing, I was able to remind myself, and within the reminding, I found it effective because it was such a personal decision or point that within comparing the thoughts and emotions about playing video games versus this personal decision with a purpose, it's clear that the emotions and thoughts in video games isn't something that's very personal or very like a really it's not like a really strong decision. So within having that, it's like very clear that okay, this is the decision I made, and this is, let's say, who I am. So that's why I'm gonna stick to it, and it's why I find it to be effective as well.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I like that. I mean, with any change that you have to apply in your life, I mean, initially your previous habitual patterns are going to want to take over. And as Jürgen suggested, having that reminder for yourself. When you really want to, when the emotions come and you're like, oh, I want to go and play that game. I just want to get away from it. Just for a moment, also just breathing and going, okay, if I'm going to go and play those video games, I'm just going to cycle back in the same pattern. So best to, in this moment, breathe, just deal with what is going on inside of me. That's a very cool suggestion. Thanks, Yogan.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is it from my side. And Yogan, thank you very much for joining us within this Hangout. I'm sure it was very informative, very practical sharing. Um, and I'm sure you enjoyed yourself as well.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah. Also
Right.
useful for me too. Yeah.
Great. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for listening and joining. And for more practical assistance and support, all the interviews are available on Equa. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.